Jobs, the man who co-founded Apple, has died. He was 56 and had been suffering from cancer. Apple says it has lost a visionary and creative genius. President Obama has called him one of the great American innovators, brave enough to think differently, bold enough to believe he could change the world, and talented enough to do it. Our technology correspondent Rory Jones reports.
Around the world, grief at the passing of someone who was much more than an amazingly successful businessman. For millions, Steve Jobs was the man whose technology changed the way we live. The tributes have come from presidents, prime ministers and business rivals.
He really, was a real icon, a real industry icon, creating very, very special and innovative products.
We're going to make some history together today.
January 2007, and a classic Steve Jobs performance. A simple product launch turned into a major event by a man with a sense of theatre and a charisma rare in the technology world.
Good morning, Starbucks. How can I help you?
Yes, I'd like to order 4,000 lattes to go, please. No, just kidding.
The iPhone was, after all, just a phone, but its success was the latest triumph of a company which proved that good design was essential to good computing. The Apple story started at an amateur computing club, where in the early 70s, Steve Jobs met Steve Wozniak, and they were soon working on their first computers.
I'm going to remember him as always being very quick mind, and almost all the time that we had discussions about how something should be done in a company, he was almost always right, and he had thought it out, and he had thought out why a product should go to the left instead of to the right.
We shall prevail. On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh.
It was in 1984 that Apple really shook things up with the launch of the Mac, the first personal computer to be navigated via a mouse. But soon afterwards, Steve Jobs was forced out of the business he'd founded. Away from Apple, he didn't stand still.
To infinity and beyond!
Pixar, the animation firm which went on to create films like Toy Story, made Jobs a very rich man. But in 1997, he returned to Apple, whose very survival was then in doubt. The iMac was the first product that signalled a resurgence, a computer with a design very different from the beige boxes, which until then had been almost the only choice. But it was the arrival of the iPod that showed that Apple could move beyond computing and transform another industry, music. As recently as last year, Jobs unveiled the iPad, which promises to change the way we use technology once again. For years, though, he'd lived with cancer, and he told students at Stanford University that facing death brought things into focus.
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become.
He was the man who cared about what products looked like, not just what they did. Steve Jobs, a visionary who saw the power of technology to change the way we live.
And Rory is here with me now. You read some of the tributes to him today. What an extraordinary man.
Yes, a very driven man too, probably a very difficult man to work for. Such was his perfectionism. There are stories of teams working on a product that was not going well, being called in and told by Steve Jobs they ought to hate each other for what they were doing to the company. A very demanding man, but a man who knew instinctively, he felt, what customers wanted before they knew it themselves. Apple was never a company that did market research. It just went on determinedly on its road into the future and demanded that everybody else came with it.
And obviously all the things that he has come up with, the iPad, the iPhone, the things that people use so regularly now every day. What happens now to Apple? Can they continue on that journey without him?
Well, you've got to remember there are some very talented people there, including the British designer Jonathan Ive, who is the man behind those individual products. I think the question is not so much the next couple of years as who in the longer term will have the courage to take the company in a completely different direction, which is what Steve Jobs kept doing. That power to think differently, reject the conventional wisdom of the rest of his industry.
Rory Jones, thank you very much.